I'm the program director. If you haven't already signed up on our website to receive our newsletter, please do so. It's www.hopeandhealingcenter.org. At the end of the program, we're going to have a quick little evaluation using the clickers you received. So if we could just have 2 or 3 minutes of your time, that will help us with our program outcomes. And now I would like to introduce Marian Mankin, a program director at Beau's Place. She's been with Beau's Place since 2004. She coordinates the grief support groups for families who have experienced a parent's death and the Little Friends program for 3 to 5-year-olds. She frequently presents on topics related to bereavement and is a current member and former board president at the National Alliance for Grieving Children. She's a licensed clinical social worker whose previous experience includes working as a therapist in a psychiatric hospital and in therapeutic foster care. Welcome.
Well, thank you all for coming out tonight and braving the traffic to be with me this evening. I'm glad you're here. We're a very grief-avoidant culture. It's not something that we're really comfortable talking about. And so just to give you a sense of what the evening's going to be like, I know this audience has both people who are themselves grieving the death of a significant other, as well as those who want to help support them. So the content's really for both of those audiences. And so I'm going to talk just a wee bit about Beau's Place, just so you're aware of this local resource. And then I'm going to talk about what the grief journey is like for most people who are grieving the death of someone close to them, a little theory about why people feel the way they do and some common reactions that they have. And then I'm going to talk about ways that you could be supportive to people who are grieving, or if you're grieving yourself, some things that might be helpful to you based on both the research and also our experience at Beau's Place. And so Beau's Place is a nonprofit organization offering free grief support services for children and adults. Many people are aware that we offer family groups, but I do want to make you all aware that we offer groups for adults of any age, as well as a young adult group for 18 to 30-year-olds. And so we do have services for adults attending just by themselves without kids. And our mission is that Beau's Place exists to enhance the lives of those who've experienced the death of a loved one. And our motto is where hearts are healed. And our beliefs are that grief is the natural reaction to the death of a loved one. Often in our culture, people want to make grief to be something like depression or something pathological, but it's just a normal reaction for what we all go through. And the duration and intensity of grief are unique for each individual. No two people grieve the same way. And we believe that people have the internal capacity for healing given a supportive and appropriate environment. And sometimes that environment's not necessarily in their day-to-day life, so that additional support might be needed. And it's not about forgetting the person, it's about developing a changing relationship with them and continuing on with one's own life. And that's positive and possible for the bereaved individuals and families to continue their lives with hope, recovery, and growth. One of our beliefs at Beau's Place is that it's possible to have a great sadness in your life and still have a happy life. And that's the hope that we hold out to the participants in our programs. And so this slide is to set context. It's a quote from C.S. Lewis, who wrote a book called A Grief Observed After the Death of His Wife. He wrote that her absence is like the sky spread over everything. And so that's the context that we're going into when we're talking about the death of a significant other. Someone that's been your life partner has been part of your life and touches all aspects of your life. And so when they've died, there's no part of your life that you can look at that you don't have some connection to them with. And so it's just like the sky, like you said, spread out over everything. We talk about grief as a journey at Beau's Place. And think about the journeys you've made in your own life. Anyone here like to travel? I know I love to travel. Have any of your travels had unexpected frustrations, unexpected joys, unexpected difficulties, unexpected developing relationships, someone you meet on the train, those kind of things? So journeys, you start off thinking you're going to experience one thing, but then it might have a lot of twists and turns. And that's true of the grief journey too. And also, each person has their own individualized journey as well. Have you ever had a co-traveler who had a totally different experience than you did of the trip? You loved a location and they hated it, that sort of thing. And so even the people that you think you know how they're going to respond might respond in very different ways than you expect. And so that's part of the journey as well. And so grief, I'm going to talk some about grief theory, but please keep in mind that grief is a fundamentally subjective experience. Each person grieves in their own unique way. And so this is a drawing that one of my colleagues came up with to try to describe that there's no straight path through grief. Grief is messy. It's that tangled knot in between, that you have your life before the death that has its more consistent ways, and then it throws you into a whole swirl of different experiences. But hopefully at the end, you can get to a point where you're engaged in your life as it is now, like your normal before has changed by grief, and people are trying to find their new normal. And hopefully they can get to a point where they have laughter, love, support, and have really adapted into a more sustainable life afterwards. And so I want to talk about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, because this is where a lot of people go when they talk about grief. If you took Psych 101, you probably saw this theory. And I want to say, it was developed in 1969. If we're a grief avoidant culture now, we really were then. People didn't tell people when they were dying from cancer. It was very secretive, and people didn't like to talk about it. And so she developed this theory based on cancer patients that she was working with who were dying themselves. And over time, it came to be applied to any kind of major loss, to people who were grieving, people who were moving, people who were divorcing. But people also tried to sort of see it as a how-to. Even today, people will say to me, well, have you talked about the stages yet? Because I want to know how to do it right. And that's a lot of pressure to put on someone who is grieving, saying this is how you should feel and what go through. But the stages themselves are controversial within the bereavement community because of the ways people have tried to apply them to all people who are grieving through pop culture. And so we just wanted to let you know that these are common experiences that people may have, but not everybody is going to even feel these. I've met with people who say, I don't feel any anger at all. You don't necessarily have to feel all these. And so denial is that sense of it can't really be happening. This anger, why is it happening to me? Who's to blame for it? Bargaining, that sense of what can I do to make this be different than it is? And that depression, that sense of just feeling helpless and hopeless, that there's nothing that you can do to change it. And then acceptance wasn't necessarily saying you're okay with it, but that you accept the truth of the death. But even Kubler-Ross herself, as she was dying in her last book, she said that the stages were never meant to help tuck messy emotions into neat packages. And I think that's part of why they are so popular, and that people want it to be contained. They want to have that five-step program they can go through and be through their grief. But that's just really not how it works, and that's not how the stages were intended. And just to show you how pervasive they are, I found this on the internet. It was the 5 stages of my cat being stuck in a t-shirt. And you had the denial, the anger, the bargaining, the depression, and the acceptance in the face of the cat. And so it's everywhere. Like once you know them, you'll see them everywhere. And like I said, it's not a how-to. It's just her experience of what people went through. William Morden is a well-known grief therapist, author, and researcher. He's been part of a lot of longitudinal studies about grief over time, and also has been in the field for years and years. I know, like when I took my first grief and bereavement class, his book, Grief Counseling and Grief Therapy, was what we studied. But he has a lot of through his experience and research, he's come up with what he called like tasks of mourning, things that are helpful to people as they navigate their grief journey, things that people can, focus on. And the first one is to accept the reality of the death. Anyone who's been through the death of someone close to them, even if it was expected, even if it was a long-term illness, there's that sense of, it just doesn't seem real. I knew it was coming, but just the idea that I'll never see him again just doesn't seem real to me. And people say that all the time, that sense of it just, I feel like it's a dream, that it didn't really happen. And I've had people tell me, I like to pretend he's on a business trip, that kind of thing. We're just not wanting to accept the reality that it's happened. And so it's really coming to that understanding that reunion's not possible in this lifetime as part of this task. And people go through periods of yearning and searching and really having experiences where they feel like they see or sense the person close to them. Very vivid dreams and visitation dreams in specific are very common when people are grieving. So that sense of still having that yearning and reaching out to them and wanting that sense of communication. I've had people tell me that they, keep their spouse's cell phone going so they can call them and leave them messages because they just automatically find themselves wanting to call them throughout the day. But just that sense of really coming to accept that person has really died can be a big task in moving on your grief journey. And the next task is to process the pain of the grief. And I call this task the good, the bad, and the ugly because it's really looking at all aspects of that person and your relationship to them, because even the most beautiful, healthy relationships are complicated. You know, you have things that you love about their personality, things that just drove you crazy. You know, all those things are part of your relationship. And so being able to feel all the feelings that are associated with your relationship with that person, and also all the feelings that you're experiencing in their absence. And so it really takes a lot of time and energy. And also, if you don't focus on all those feelings, the people who just put on a brave face and never open up about what's really going on to anyone, it's going to come out some other way. Grief will come out physically, stomach aches, headaches, and those sort of things, but it can also come out as depression and other things. And so it's really finding the time to focus on your feelings and process all of them, the good, the bad, the ugly, the things that were difficult, the things that were wonderful, the things that make you laugh, the things that make you sad, to really look at all of those emotions. And task 3 is to adjust in a world without the deceased. And this takes place on multiple levels. You know, first, there's just so many logistics, so many things that you have to figure out, whether it be the finances or, you know, who's going to manage carpool, or, you know, maybe someone was really dependent on the other person and they have to learn to drive or learn some new skills because it was something that the other person really did. And so really learning how to manage the world and how you interact with the world around you. You know, maybe that was the children's primary caretaker who died and having to find childcare so the person can work. That sort of thing. You know, there's lots of different things that people have to balance that are just with the logistics of day-to-day life. So those are the external adjustments. But then there's the internal adjustments, which is adjusting your sense of identity and your sense of self. One mom talked about how her husband was very much involved in the children's soccer program, and the first time they went to play soccer after he died, people kept saying, "Oh, is your husband coaching again this year?" and coming up to her. And she said when she left soccer that day, she realized that she was no longer a wife but a widow. And that was one of her internal adjustments, looking at herself in a different way. How does this death change the way I look at myself and I feel about myself and my perspective on who I am? And then there's also your spiritual adjustments, which would be how the death affects your beliefs, values, and just assumptions about the world. You know, so this could be challenges to faith, but also even folks who don't have a faith background might have a sense of what the world is like. You know, people will talk about a moral universe, like if you do good things will happen to you, those sort of things. And when something like this happens, can your belief system accommodate it? And I meant to say earlier, if people have questions along the way or want me to restate something, I know I can be a fast talker. Please just raise your hand. Okay, is that better? Okay, I'm sorry. I'll try not to move too much. We're going to try the one that sits on you, but then I have a necklace that was going to rattle it the whole time. That would be more frustrating. And so those are the adjusting to the world. And sometimes it's just the small things. Maybe your spouse used to make coffee every morning, and making coffee is a reminder they're not there anymore, so people start going to Starbucks, that kind of thing. Sometimes it's those day-to-day adjustments that can take a while. You know, one mom talked about how her husband's favorite soda was the one that he only drank, and it was on the counter for a couple years after he died because she just didn't want to move it because it was a reminder of his presence in their home. And task 4 is to find an enduring connection with the deceased in the midst of embarking on a new life. And what this is really about, when you're in relationship with someone, it's a back and forth flow of energy. You know, I support you, you support me. It's back and forth. And so when someone dies, you're still reaching out to them with that energy, but you're not getting that life-giving energy back. So what are those things in your life that can give you that sense of energy and sustenance that you're not able to get through the relationship anymore? So it's not just like finding another person to go in their place. It's finding what makes your life meaningful in their absence. So it's a little bit different. And it's really integrating the experience of loss into your life, and also creating what we call a continuing bond. A continuing bond is that sense of connection that you can have with someone even after they died. You know, people think, well, I wonder what he would have thought about this, you know, and that sense of wondering about things, and also carrying on traditions that you may have started with that person. How can you still feel that connection with them? And people create all kinds of rituals to help them really celebrate their relationship with the loved one that died. It might be something significant, like starting a scholarship fund at their college because their college was meaningful to them, or it might be doing a special fun run for the illness that they died from each year as a way of acknowledging them. And people come up with all kinds of small personal rituals too. Like, for example, one woman told me that she, on the anniversary of the death, each year gets 2 scoops of ice cream, the person that died's favorite flavor and her favorite, and eats them together, and that's her way of acknowledging them. So, just finding ways to keep having that sense of connection to your life and also going on. I think the mic's gone out. It's still here? Okay, sorry. Maybe my ears have gone out. And so what influences an individual's grief journey? And this is a picture from our camp Healing Hearts, where we often, one of the camps is a labyrinth-based camp, and we talk about grief as a journey and walk labyrinths. And so some of the things that affect an individual's grief journey, William Morden identified several mediators. And so one of them is who the person was that died. We mourn to the extent that we love. So the closer you are to someone, the more you're going to grieve their death. And so that's the first one. And then the nature of the attachment. Was this a strong attachment, someone that you were very close to? Was it a secure attachment? Or was there ambivalence there, or conflicts? Or was it a very dependent relationship where people are trying to figure out who they are separate from the person? It used to be that with old attachment theory, people believed you just had to sever the attachment and create new attachments, but now we know it's more about finding a way to have an attachment that's that continuing bond. And the mediator 3 is how the person died. I think we can all think of things that we can think of as a good death. Like if I were to live to 125 and have a big party surrounded by my family and friends and still be making jokes and be physically able to walk to my chair and die in my sleep that night, most people would say, well, that was a good death. She had a good life, And we can all think of those kind of circumstances where people seem to have lived the fullest and be at a point in their life where it was sad that they died, but it felt appropriate. But then there are deaths that are inappropriate. When someone who's 35 is murdered, it's out of the life cycle, they're a young person. That can make it really difficult. And there are also deaths in our culture that are still pretty stigmatized. People really struggle with how do you talk to your community about a death by suicide. And there's a huge problem within our country of overdoses right now on different opiates, whether they be over the counter or are illegal. And so deaths like that can be really hard for people to talk about because of the stigma that's associated with it. And also even things like, I've had, a woman tell me that when her husband was murdered, she felt that others might judge her because whenever she heard of a murder before, she thought, well, they must have been engaged in something dodgy or that sort of thing. And so she felt like other people might be judging her. So those kind of things can make it more difficult. And so how the person died can be a big part of it. And then there's also the historical antecedents, like how much death have you already experienced in your life? Where are you in your own life cycle? I know my mama, who's 96, she's pretty used to death. She moved from where she used to live because she said, well, everybody I used to know either died or has Alzheimer's and can't remember me. So, she went to move with my aunt, And so her sense of death and dying is very different than some of the young families that I see that are in their 30s with young children. And so, what your beliefs about death and what your experiences are with death and how comfortable you are with it affects how you grieve. And then there's personality variables. And there's been a lot of studies about grief and trying to differentiate gender and other things like that. And like most things in human behavior, there's not one way that men grieve and one way that women grieve. There's different ways that people grieve that are on a spectrum, and some men might fall more on this side, and some women might fall more on that side, but you can't assume people are going to grieve a different way based on gender. One of the things that we found that in the research is something called loss-oriented focus of coping are restoration oriented, and some people who are more loss oriented might focus on what they're missing, what they don't have, going through scrapbooks, really thinking about the past. And then some people are more restoration oriented, are thinking, what do I need to do next? What's the next plan? How can I cope with this? How can I manage? And a lot of people kind of switch back and forth between the two of them. Might have a real big coping day, and then the next day need to spend some time crying. Kind of move back and forth within those two styles of coping. And Kenneth Doka, who really studied a lot of gender differences in grief, he instead of, like I said, having it be based on gender, he talked about there are people who are intuitive grievers, which are the more emotional side of things. Someone who says, I'm devastated, and they're just crying and sobbing, and they're really more emotionally demonstrative. And people who are instrumental grievers, who might say, I'm devastated, in a totally even voice, but still feel that same level of devastation, but be able to be more straightforward in how they present things and not very emotional in how they present things. But they might move it more towards action. Like, for example, he tells the story of a dad who, after the death of his daughter, who died in a car accident and hit a fence, one of the first things he did was go to his neighbor's house and rebuild that fence. Like, he just had to do something. And so that would be an example of a more instrumental griever. And so people move back and forth. And I would say, he said that probably more men fall on the instrumental side and more women on the intuitive. But like I said, it varies tremendously from person to person in terms of how people grieve. And then there's also the cognitive style, how you think about things. Studies have shown that optimists have a better grief result. And if you think about what being an optimist is, that if you believe that good things will happen in the future, that really can affect you positively in terms of the grief experience. But also if your pattern is more to ruminate, this gives you a lot to really ruminate on when you have the death of a loved one. And so that can be really difficult. And also, how do you feel about yourself in terms of your own self-esteem and self-efficacy? If you go into the grief experience already thinking, I'm a capable person, I can get through things, that's going to affect how you grieve. But if you think, I don't know how to manage, life is overwhelming, this is something that's pretty overwhelming in and of itself, and so that's going to be more of a struggle. And then there's also your social variables. Some people have a lot of social support, people showing up with casseroles, people trying to help them mow the lawn and doing all kinds of things. And some people are more socially isolated. You have some families in Houston who may have moved here to get treatment at MD Anderson and not have family or friends or a community. And so they're going to struggle more because they feel more socially isolated. I think people tend to do better just in general if they have more social support, and this is certainly a case where that's true. And also the last one is concurrent stresses. Death doesn't happen in a vacuum. The mortgage may have been behind and other stresses going on before the person died. And so what else are they worried about? Are they even able to focus on their grief right now? Or do they have other things, and a couple years from now they'll realize, wait a minute, I never really focused on my grief and it's still there. And so whatever the concurrent stresses are going on also affects them. And so here's some other factors that affect the grief process. Beliefs and values. And this is not just your religious beliefs, but also your beliefs about the world. Is it okay to ask for help from other people or to seek help outside of the family? Are there mourning rituals that your family does to help with the grief process? How do your beliefs and values fit into what this experience is of grief? And then there's also their patterns for managing crisis and change. People very rarely use new skills right after someone dies. You kind of revert to what you've done in the past. You might learn new skills along the way as you travel your grief journey, but how do you handle crisis? Are you flexible? Are you rigid? Are you easygoing? Are you open to help from others? And how do you navigate change? Because no matter what, there's going to be a lot of significant changes after someone dies. So how do you get through those things, and what are your patterns for doing that? And then there's a lot of secondary losses that people experiences. When you're talking about a couple, people get to be known as the same person almost sometimes. People talk about going to grandpa and grandma's house, and when it's just grandma, people still say grandpa and grandma's for a while, and people get used to calling a couple by both their names. And so when you're moving from an identity as a couple identity to a single person identity, that can be really difficult. Particularly with some of our parents, they'll talk about how it can be hard for them to be seen as a single parent because they think, people will assume that they're divorced, and that sense of, no, but my husband died. It's not that I chose to be a single parent, or not that I went through that experience, but I no longer have another parent alive who can help me with this. So that identity, moving from the couple identity to the single identity, can be very difficult. And then a lot of our families also experience a financial loss as a result of the death, and that can bring a lot of lifestyle changes. They might have to sell the family home, move to an apartment, move to a different neighborhood, so they lose connections with friends in the community that they might have known before. Maybe if it's not as significant as a loss, it might mean they can't have things like the family vacations they used to have, or other things that they had because they had that additional income. But the death can also cause a change in lifestyle. But there's also the change with friends and lifestyle of just not being included in the same way that you were before, that a lot of people who are grieving the death of their partner go through. Friends will say, well, I didn't want to invite you to the dinner party because it was all couples and I thought it might be awkward, or I didn't want to invite you to the baby shower because I know it's a hard time and I didn't know if you'd want to go. Our friends just not knowing what to say or how to reach out. And so you feel excluded. But you also can have the changes in friend relationships where people don't mean to, but they pull away. It might be the awkwardness of not knowing what to say, but it also could be things like, well, my problems seem so small, so I don't really want to bring them up. But the more people pull away and don't share their full selves with someone they used to be close to, the more that distance is felt. And often that distance can grow, so people can find themselves kind of drifting away from the friends that they used to have and finding those friends not reaching out in the same way. And there can also be sense of security. What was known and what was expected can be changed because of this death. Feeling less safe about the future, and just feeling sometimes less safe in your home. Those sort of things where you're just like, I wish someone else was here when I heard that noise in the night, that kind of thing. And just feeling uncertain about the future and what things will come. And there's also the circumstances surrounding the death. Sometimes there's lots of changes because of the death. What else is going to change in the life? What did we experience and what did we see because of the death? That sort of thing. And, every human experience takes place within culture. And so grief is a culture experience too. What your cultural background is, what your, the beliefs because of that, and the social norms really play a big part in grief. Has anyone been to a funeral outside of their usual cultural norms and seen people behave differently? Like, wow, I never saw that at a funeral before. Different cultures have very different ways of expressing their grief. Is it okay to cry openly? Is it meant to be held in? Are we going to have a celebration of life versus a more mournful experience? Is it going to be something where the person's name is barely mentioned as part of the services, or is it going to be all focused on them? All of these things are based on culture and beliefs, and so the social and cultural environment plays a big part. And sometimes families come from combined cultural and social environments, and that can be an additional pressure, where one side of the family is like, well, that's not how you grieve, you're not doing it right. And so that can be hard too. People who are grieving often feel a lot of judgment from others throughout the grief process, because everyone has their way that they think they've done it. For example, just think of small things like Thanksgiving. Do you have certain beliefs about what kind of stuffing you're supposed to have? In my house we have to have two because one's a cornbread and one's a white bread stuffing. And so different things like that can take place on most rituals. And so you're talking about a big ritual, which is, funeral arrangements and things like that. So culture comes in a big way. And also, what was the person's level of functioning prior to the death? What were their coping skills like? That's going to affect how they grieve and how they go through the process too, in terms of who they are and how well they navigate the world already. And another aspect is the unique grief journey of each family member, because grief is experienced within your family and within your community. And so, how the other people who love the person that you loved are grieving is going to affect how you grieve and how you share and how comfortable you are. And there's often a very normal reaction where people want to protect other people in their family. Well, I don't want to talk about it with mom because I know she's sad already, and so I'll just talk about it with my friends, or I'll talk about it somewhere else. And so sometimes people within a family don't feel comfortable sharing with each other. And we've also seen a phenomenon a lot where someone will be doing really, really well and managing things while someone else is really having a hard time. But when that other person who's having a hard time starts to do better, then the other person will start to struggle. And so people can kind of go back and forth in how they're doing. But they certainly affect each other in how they're grieving. And so now I'm going to talk about what are some of the common grief reactions. And, as I said before, one of the most common is yearning, just that sense of wishing you could still have that person's presence in your life. And we do an activity at Bo's Place called Wishing Flags, where we show them Tibetan prayer flags, which are hung outside for the prayers to be delivered to God by the wind. But we say instead of prayer flags, we're going to do wishing flags, that when someone dies, there's often things that you wish you might have told them before they died, or things that have happened since then that you just wish they knew. And so we have them write those wishes on the wishing flags. And a mom wrote, "I wish you were here to help guide the boys and give them your unselfish love. Please guide us from above. I wish, hope, and pray that you are happy and at peace." And so that sense of yearning, still wanting to know that the person's presence, but also yearning to know that the person's okay, that sense of wondering about them. And so grief is not just something we experience mentally. Grief is a full body experience. It affects us physically, emotionally, spiritually, socially, and cognitively. And so I'm going to talk about it from those different perspectives. So first is physical. I know I get stress headaches and stomach aches when things are difficult, and I think most people have some sort of physical reaction to something big emotionally, and so that's true when people are grieving too. People can be more accident prone, a lot of stomach issues. A lot of people talk about anxiety attack things, just like my heart was racing, I just felt overwhelmed. Headaches. Insomnia is incredibly common. People can stay busy all day, but then try to go to bed and everything is just right there. And so insomnia is really common. Migraine headaches, muscle tightness. Some people are comfort eaters, like when they are feeling bad, they want to eat. Some people, when they're feeling bad, just can't eat a bite. And so you have people who gain weight, people who lose weight. Sometimes people have trouble with their relationships and sexuality. And sometimes people just feel physically weak because they're exhausted. We've even had people develop allergies, like someone who'd had a cat for 19 years suddenly became allergic to it. Your body is just thrown out of whack, and so different changes like that can happen. And emotionally, that sense of agitation, waiting for the other shoe to drop, or bad things happen in threes. Have you ever heard those kind of statements? Like, people often think, okay, this is going to be one in a series, and so what else is going to happen next? A lot of anger and frustration. People experience more anxiety. Some people become more compliant, just that sense of, just tell me what to do, I can't think right now. And so you do have that sometimes, and that sense of crying unexpectedly. Someone talked about bursting into tears over the tomatoes because someone walked by wearing his wife's perfume, that kind of thing, where some things can take you unexpectedly, and you find yourself crying. Sometimes fears of being in group, just being surrounded by others without having that other person who you used to turn to when you were in social situations that seemed awkward. People might have trouble making decisions without having the other person there to bounce things off of, being more irritable. Just think about how you are after a good day when you get caught in traffic, and then how you are after a bad day when you get caught in traffic. Just when you're grieving, it's like your buffer zone gets a lot thinner. So things that used to maybe be like water off a duck's back can get you a bit more than they used to. And some people often also experience a loss in self-esteem. Grieving can make you feel like you're different, and it can be hard to feel different, or maybe makes you feel more judged from others or excluded, and that can really affect how you feel about yourself. People also experience moodiness and restlessness in a wide range. And like I said before, not every single grieving person is going to experience all of any of these things. These are just some kind of common reactions that people sometimes have. And so some of the emotional reactions too are fear. Am I going to be safe? Am I going to be okay? Am I going to make it through this? Am I going to have enough money in my retirement account without his salary? Those different things, like fear about the future and what it will hold. Am I going to be able to navigate this by myself? What's it going to be like for me as I go through different events? And a lot of confusion. There's often a lot of family drama that goes on after the death of a loved one. I've had a lot of families have issues of fights over an estate, even if it was a very limited estate, or maybe blame within the family for what happened. So maybe, the paternal side of the family was an important part of the family's day-to-day life, and all of a sudden they're not talking to mom and the kids after dad's suicide because they blame mom. Those sort of things where people really pull apart instead of come together over grief. So confusion as to what's our day-to-day, how are we going to manage things, how are we going to get it by, and how are we going to fix these relationships. And guilt is incredibly common. And, even if the logical mind can say something like, well, I know it's not my fault that he got cancer, sometimes the emotional mind just wants there to be something I could have done. Maybe if I had said something sooner, maybe if we'd gone to a different doctor, that sense of what could I have done to make this different than it is. And I think part of why guilt is so common is that grief feels so out of control. If I make it my fault, that feels a little bit like control. And so I think that's why guilt comes into play. And just because people wish there was something they could have done differently. And anger. Anger is huge. Anger is a big emotion that's more socially acceptable than sadness within our culture. And so sometimes something like grief can come out as anger a lot because, if you yell at someone, they'll most likely talk to you the next day, whereas if you cry in front of them, they might avoid you. And also that sense of just it not being fair. Why me? Why my family member? Was the question? Like what would stop them from that? I think sometimes people don't want to express their strong emotions or don't want to upset others. And so part of what we work with, particularly the kids at our groups, is being able to find ways to express anger that don't hurt others, that you can still have that feeling, like all feelings are okay. It's just how you express them and finding ways to express them that don't hurt others. And there's an activity that we do for anger at Bo's Place that the adults usually really enjoy and participate in. Called Clay Smashers, where we have everyone in the group write things that they're angry about on pieces of paper, and then we post them on this big wooden plank, and then they throw hunks of clay, and they'll say, I'm angry at cancer, and they'll all throw, and it makes this very loud noise, and it's very satisfying. And if you throw it hard enough, it will stick on the wall, the clay. And so that's a way of both getting support, because the rest of the group is there with you saying, we're angry at cancer too, but you're still able to do it. I had one mom who her anger expression way was to go to garage sales and get really cheap plates, and she had her anger wall in the backyard, and she would just throw those plates and they would shatter, and so she had a big pile of shards all along the back of her garden, and that was her way of getting out her anger. And she said it became beautiful after a while. She really started collecting different colors. And so you finding what is your way to get it out, whether it be like screaming at the top of your lungs in your car, where no one else is around, being able to find a way to express those feelings. And so also social issues can come up, trouble relating with peers. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Very, each person is unique, of course, but very much so. I mean, I've heard a lot of family members talk about, someone with a chronic illness and just how angry they were for how many years because of their feelings about their own death. But each person is unique in how they approach death. We've also had family members who spent their last few years, making great books to give to their kids and setting up a foundation to help, fund their illness. Each person is unique. It's all about those coping skills and that worldview piece. Those all come into play as someone's anticipating their own death too. And also, I think for both the person dying and the people grieving, it's new territory. Sometimes people behave in ways that are surprising to themselves. And so socially, sometimes people feel like their peers just don't get it. Someone once described grief as trying to describe the taste of water. Either you've had it or you haven't. There's if you don't know, it's really hard to explain that total experience. And so sometimes people withdraw from social activities because they don't want people to avoid it or they don't want to feel up to it. Some people become just try to fill the world with talking and trying to stay busy, whereas some people become more passive. Some people might become more demanding of others, whereas others become more dependent. Each person is unique, but it affects how you interact with the social world too. And then cognitively, grief can look a lot like ADHD, where people just have trouble completing tasks. Adults will talk about, well, I write a grocery list, but I still come home with half the groceries. I'm just really having trouble completing tasks. I'm more forgetful, not really attentive to detail. Sometimes there might be something really big going on in the news that everybody's talking about, but the person is like, what are you talking about? They haven't really noticed or picked up on it because their world has become so much smaller because of their grief, that what they can see is the person not being there. They can't see the world around them in the same way. Some people have memory loss, short-term memory loss for a while. And some people, on the other hand, become overachievers. Like work is the one place that feels normal, so I'm going to really focus on work and focus on what I can do to achieve things because that's where things haven't changed. And also it affects you spiritually. People talk about feeling anger at God. Why would God do this? Why my husband? Why my wife? Some people find a lot of comfort in their faith community and really turn to their faith community, and that's a source of comfort for them. And some people find decreased faith, where it just feels like this isn't the world I thought it was, and so what else doesn't fit with what I believe anymore. And also it raises more questions about what happens after someone dies, when someone you love has died. That sense of, well, what really happens? Am I going to have is reunion possible with them in the future? What do I really believe about the afterlife? And sometimes people might be angry at their religious leaders for things people have said. But most of all, I think that grief is very much a spiritual quest, and that people really do try to find some sort of meaning from what's happened and some way to navigate it. And so how do you go through the grief journey in a healthy way? And this is a picture of some moms from our Camp Healing Hearts, where we have a family retreat for families in our program. And so part of, our belief is being able to come up with new happy memories in the life that you are now, and really being able to engage in life and connect with joy is one of the things that we really hope to offer our families. But what we have found from both the research and our experience is that there are different therapeutic elements, things that are helpful to people when they're grieving. The first one is really coming up with a narrative, being able to talk out your experience with the death, being able to talk about it with others, being able to incorporate it into your life story, because the death is definitely part of your life. So being able to feel like you have a place where it fits in your own personal narrative in the book of your life. One mom who'd experienced the death of her spouse, one night at group, when we have new people start, each person says their name and who in their family died and a little bit about their situation. And she'd been coming for some time, and the first night that she was able to get through her story without crying, she said, "There, I've done it. I can say it without crying now." And that was her being able to really incorporate the narrative so that it wasn't as painful each time she said it. And it's not to take away its power necessarily, but it's to take away some of its power over you. We are the stories that we tell about ourselves, and so the more we can tell a story and frame it in a way that works for us, the better it is. So being able to tell the story and incorporate it into your life. And then support networks, being able to have people in your life that offer support to you, those really empathetic listeners, those people that you know accept you as you are. And it's not always the friend that you can bare your soul to. There's certainly, we all need those, but sometimes you need the friend who's not going to talk about, but will take you to a funny movie. Like having people in your life that you can turn to and knowing that you can depend on them for the things that they do, and have them there and present with you. And then there's the cognitive affective processing, really working through what you think about this, how the death affects your thought processes and how you process the world, and really coming to a sense of what it means, really the thoughts and tasks around the death. And affective processing is more talking through all those kind of feelings, all the feelings that you feel in terms of the grief and that emotional side of things, being able to identify those. And then being able to come up with that continuing bond. What is your sense of connection to the person that died? When do you still feel that bond with them? What kind of things and activities do you do that are in their memory, that really carry on their legacy? All of us want to be remembered, and we want the people that we love to be remembered too. So it's finding a way to remember them as you continue to go through your life. And so that's what the continuing bond piece really is, holding their memory close. And then there's meaning making. One of the biggest things in current grief research is meaning making and its importance in the grief process. It's a really key component. And what meaning making really means is finding a way to understand the experience and fit it into your assumptive worldview. We all have our assumptions about how the world works and how the world is. And sometimes the death can really blow those assumptions, up in the air. And so how can you either change your worldview to accommodate what you've experienced because of the death, or how can you change your beliefs about the death so they can still fit in your worldview? So that's really what meaning making is. And it takes place on a couple of different levels. It's first that being able to make some sense of the death, even if it was a senseless death, like someone being murdered, it's pretty senseless, but still coming to an understanding of it so that it makes sense to you. Like here? Okay, sorry. I'm not used to this mic. And then also to make some sort of benefit of the experience. And that doesn't mean you're ever glad that it happened, but what is the silver lining of this dark cloud of grief that you're experienced? And a lot of these silver linings might be things like, I never knew how strong I was, after going through this experience, which I wouldn't have wished on my worst enemy. I have a sense of my own strength. I've grown. I've reached out to other family members in a different way, and I think even though we miss this person dearly, I think our family's stronger than it was before. What are those things that are the silver lining to this dark cloud, and being able to really acknowledge them and see the strength in them, and so finding those things. And also being able to reorganize your identity and see yourself as a survivor and not a victim of what you experienced, that you're someone who's been able to go through this experience and still survive. And so being able to see yourself in that way. And so that's the meaning-making piece, being able to both make sense of what it means and see yourself in a different way, and being able to acknowledge and see personal growth in yourself. And so if you're someone who wants to support someone who's had a significant other that died, those things are things to take into account. What I hear all the time from people is that sense of, well, I just don't know what to say when someone dies. What if I say or do the wrong thing? Particularly our new volunteers, that's the biggest thing they worry about. I don't want to say anything wrong. But I remember I was talking with a mom who'd experienced the death of a child, and someone asked her, what was the best thing that someone said to you after your daughter died? And she said, frankly, I can't remember the exact words anyone said to me, but it was the people who were really present, who I knew were just really there for me. Those are the people that made a difference. So even though I'm going to talk about some things to say and not to say, if you go in with the right intentions and you're willing to be present with someone who's grieving, that is a true gift, to say, I'm here and I'm here for you. And I want to be, and I want to be helpful. Even if I don't know what to say or do, I'm here, being able to be really present. So that's going to make all the difference. But some of the things that we've heard from families that can be helpful is being able to acknowledge that you don't know what they're going through. I can't imagine how difficult this is for you. I'm so sorry about the death. And being able to say, I wish I could make it better, but I can't, but I'm here to help you. What can I do? And also sometimes people struggle with, everyone says, if there's anything I can do, let me know. But it can be really hard to know what you want or what you need when you're grieving. So being able to say, hey, I really want to be helpful. I love to cook. Can I bring you a meal on Tuesday? Can I pick up the kids on Thursday? Can I mow your lawn for a while? Can I come do laundry? Give them some options and things to choose from. And also ask about the person that died. People say, how do you talk to grieving kids? I said, well, tell me about your dad. What was he like? What kind of things did you used to do together? Be able to talk about them as a person. People really love talking about their family members, and they miss that after someone dies. So being able to be there and ask them those questions. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Would you suggest that maybe instead of asking the bereaved, because I always thought that actually puts you as now I need to reach out to this person.
Yeah.
What I need. Would you suggest maybe just doing it? Yeah, I noticed your lawn was getting a little out of control. Thought I'd just come by and cut it for you.
I would say offer an idea and let them say yes or no, just because you don't know what else they have going on. But rather than saying anything, saying here's some specific things I thought of is great, and being able to go from there. But asking just in case because they might have just hired a lawn service that day. You never know. Yeah, but being able to check. But I think giving a couple of options of things that you're willing to do can be very helpful, because then they don't have to think of something just totally out of the blue. And also being able to tolerate big emotions. If there's anger there, being able to sit through it and not argue with it or push back on it, or if there's sadness, just letting someone sob or letting someone rant can be a huge relief. And so these are some things. The next ones are going to be comments that families have had difficulty with. And I want to add a caveat that sometimes these statements are things that they'll say themselves a couple of weeks later, but it may be just at the time, it could be really difficult. And so a lot of them are things that are trying to make the pain smaller. At least they're not in pain anymore. Aren't you lucky that this happened? Or it could have been worse. But one mom said, grief comes in one size, it's all extra large. There's nothing we can do to put it in a smaller box, no matter how hard we try. That people want to try to make it better, so they try to make it, well, at least it's not as bad as it could have been. But, and even things that they might really believe in their faith, they might really believe their loved one is in a better place. But when someone's really fresh in grief, they're thinking, but I don't care where they are, I want them right here with me, And so that's not relevant, yeah. What? Oh my goodness.
I started crying, I tore it up. I probably will never be able to look at those people again.
Yeah, it's exactly. I am so sorry, a previous commitment, but I'd like to take you for lunch in a couple weeks. Do something like that instead. But goodness gracious. Yeah, that's really hard. Yeah, and so anything makes it minimized is going to be hard for people. And the one that I think probably gets the most upset is, I know how you feel. People really, really struggle with that one. Even if your spouse died too, saying something like that means, I assume you feel the same way I do, is basically what you're saying. Where people really want to be able to share what they're going through. And sometimes even saying, how are you feeling, can be hard, because when people are grieving, they feel like they're supposed to say, oh, I'm feeling sad, or say some feeling. But being able to say, what has this experience been like for you? Tell me about how are things going? Tell me about what things are like for you right now. Something where you really engage them versus saying, this is contained, it's this way. Mm-hmm.
Said, "No, I feel because this is what I went through." And I asked her how she's and it was very comforting to her.
Yeah.
She talked several times.
Yeah, and I think being able to say, you know, I've experienced a death too, and it was really hard for me. I'd love you to share what it's been like for you. Something where you acknowledge you have that sameness is okay, but not that you think you know what they're experiencing. Because like I said, it's such a subjective experience. Everyone experiences grief in their own way. And so, you know, someone might say, I'm enraged, I'm totally angry, whereas someone might say, you know, I feel surprisingly at peace. I really thought I'd feel differently right now, but I feel like I'm in a good place. That may change tomorrow, you know, but you're going to get a sense of what's really going on if you ask them what their experience is rather than assume. And it's one of those things like we're fixers. We want to make things better in life. But this is not a problem that we can fix. None of us have the powers to bring someone back from the dead. But what we can say is, I'm going to be here even though it is hard, and I'm going to be present with you. And that's the message that most people really want to hear. But this is not something that we can fix. And so some of the tips that we've heard from families is to ask how they're doing and really listening. Really listen to what they say and be present. And it's, you know, one of the things we talk about is it's okay to say death and died. You know, people often say passed or went on, but, you know, we know what has happened. The person has died. And also be really clear on your role and what you can do to help. Like when you offer help, you know, make clear what's available. And also be aware of other resources, because, you know, sometimes someone might need more help or support than you're able to give. You know, can you refer them to a support group? Can you refer them to counseling? Do you know someone else that you think would be a good person to talk to them, even if it's just a friend? You know, being able to help them find those other sources of support. If they're struggling financially, is there a financial advisor? There's lots of different ways that people can need support after someone dies. And also, you know, with people that we're really close to, we have an expectation of a lifetime of memories. And when someone who's your partner dies, people miss, you know, hearing about them or hearing stories. And so if you have favorite memories or stories, it can be such a gift to share them with someone who's grieving. I had one mom who, for their child's Christmas present, asked all friends and family members to write different things about their memories of them and send in pictures, and they put them all together in a book that they gave the children. And that was such a tremendous gift, because there are all those memories that you weren't there for, because you cherish the ones that you have yourself. But how nice to get another memory from someone else, to hear that your loved one is remembered, that your loved one made them laugh too, that their kindness came out in some other way, or their goofiness, or whatever their personality traits. It's wonderful to hear those things. And we know that special days, birthdays, anniversaries, weddings, all those times where families gather and have rituals and traditions are times where family members usually have a role, you know, and so those are family times where someone's absence is really felt. So being able to reach out to them and offer support during those times that may be harder for them. The anniversary of their loved one's death, their wedding anniversary, the holidays, all those times can be heavy for people who are grieving. And another big piece is to respect the way someone is grieving. People who are grieving often feel a lot of judgment from others, and there's really no wrong or no right way to grieve. Each person's going to do it uniquely, but people will get messages from others like, oh, you're not wearing your wedding ring anymore. Like, oh, you're still wearing your wedding ring. Or, oh, yeah, his clothes are still in the closet. Oh, that's interesting. You need to clear that out. I've had family members go into someone's house and clear out the person's room while they were gone. And that's, whoa, that talk about a shocker when you get home. Those are the choices that that person needs to make at their own timetable. And so being able to respect that they're all going to grieve in their own way. If you have concerns about their safety or decisions they're making that you think might have long-term implications, as a friend, I would hope you would raise those. But if it's just, well, you're crying more than I think you should, keep that to yourself. Don't judge those things. Let people grieve in their own way. And also, sometimes people protect their friends from grief, so they may have a lot more going on than they care to share with you. Maybe they don't want to cry in front of you. Whatever they're feeling, let them feel it. And try not to pass any judgment. And so now, like, if you yourself are grieving, so what are some things that can be supportive? And just the first thing is grief is exhausting. And so I don't want to tell anyone that you need to do this right away or, put an unreasonable demand. To know that these are just some things that people who are grieving have found helpful, and some of the literature has supported. If you're not up to doing them at this particular time, be patient with yourself and know that grief can take all of your resources sometimes. But just keep these things in the back of your mind. And I do want to point out, when y'all came in, there were some handouts on the front door, by the front door, and this one is Suddenly Solo. It has a list of more logistical things, like things around finances to consider, and things around getting copies of the death certificate and that sort of thing, and also some things about relationship, as well as these tips about ways to support yourself. So I just want to make sure that you saw that was out there. Yeah, they'll be just right by that door. Sure. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't sometimes look like you're grieving. But you are, yeah, and there's something called anticipatory grief, that when people really know the death is coming, sometimes they prepare, and maybe they get more opportunities to work through the things they want to say and express to that person and process them while they're still living. But folks who've had a long period of caretaking, some of the things that I see sometimes is a sense of being at loose ends. Like, my whole schedule was involved in caring for this other person. How do I fill my days? How do I get my sense of rhythm back? Because my whole routine was based on caring for them, and so sometimes they struggle with how to balance their day-to-day life without having that kind of organizing factor of caring for this other person. I've also had people express a sense of guilt, like, now I can go to the movies without worrying, and I can go out and do things, but I'm only able to do that because that person's not here. And so feeling guilty that they are able to have those freedoms that they weren't able to have while the person was still living and ill. So that's a kind of that survivor's guilt kind of thing that folks can have who are caretakers. Mm-hmm.
I had a long caretaker, and I find that my grief now is more triggered by caring for her.
Mm-hmm.
I miss the bills I had to get for her. I miss getting special sodas that she liked. I miss putting her to bed every night and bringing her a glass of ice for her.
Yeah, all those things that were expressions of affection and care.
I saw a bunch of roses, and every week I would bring her a dozen roses and have that out of bed.
Mm-hmm.
And the roses themselves would say,
Yeah, absolutely.
and yet I was thinking about what she said, is that my wife said at one point, I'm helping you grieve. And to a certain extent, most of my grieving now has been triggered by the caring and not so much the trips we took for the kids. And I'm just wondering in my own head, I'm not asking you the question, but
I think people can be very at peace with their relationship and with death and how they were through the death process, but then still miss the day to day. And so it's that sense of yearning and searching. You know, some people who maybe didn't have that sense of connection and closure their grief process might be struggling with the conflict, the heels to our relationship that we never got to, or the discussions that we should have had, or the anger that was not processed through. And so part of what they bring to the grief process is all that emotion that isn't still in need of expression. Whereas other people, they've expressed their emotion, they've expressed their feelings. What they're trying to figure out is, how do I build my schedule? Like, who do I talk to about whether that was a good movie or not? You know, like all those kind of day-to-day life things where how do I get those needs for companionship or, you know, those things. Oh, yeah, exactly. We won't post the PowerPoint just because we have pictures in there that have family pictures and that sort of thing. But they are going to post a video of the presentation, and some of the materials are on here. And so some of the tips, unless there's another question, I'm happy to respond. Okay. Is try not to make any big changes in the first year after the death. When you're emotionally under stress is usually not the best time to make a big decision. And so turning your life upside down, moving across the country right away, those kind of things could really be hard to deal with once you've kind of settled into their person's absence. So trying not to really, make those big decisions. And being able to acknowledge the emotions as they appear, to not beat yourself up for them. If you're feeling angry, if you're feeling sad, or if you're just feeling kind of sentimental in that sense of really having that sense of missing things about the person, experience those feelings and try not to judge yourself about them or even to hide them. Because sometimes people really do hide their feelings. That one of the things I hear from parents all the time, they'll say, I'm worried about the kids. I go into my room, I turn up the radio really loud, and I sob, but I don't see the kids crying, but that's really hiding those feelings. They're not sharing them with others. But being able to say to those around you, I'm just feeling sad today. It's just where I am right now, and being able to acknowledge them. Mm. That makes a lot of sense for me. Yeah.
He was a surgeon. What would he do? But it is amazing that sometimes it comes just like that.
And one of the things I've heard a lot from families is the first year is all the firsts. So you prepare for the first Thanksgiving, you prepare for the first birthday, the first anniversary, and you kind of mark them down month by month, milestone by milestone. And so at the end of that first year, you're like, wow, I got through the first year. And then often people have told me that the second year, they're like, wait a minute, all that's still true, and sometimes the second year can be harder because people don't expect it, and maybe they don't have the same social support around them that they used to, and so they can struggle. So I think if you can avoid a lot of big decisions during those first few years, the better. Unfortunately, some families aren't able to avoid them, but if you can, if we all know when we're feeling like we're thinking clearly. And so if you're not feeling like you're thinking clearly, try to surround people around you that you trust and are to help you make those decisions. Absolutely. Yeah, because people aren't comfortable.
just to get away from the subject. I assume it's just as painful for them, not us.
I think that people worry that they're going to pull the lid off it and everything's going to spill out, whereas if you were just able to say, oh yeah, that was hilarious, and be able to respond as the memory, in the same tone as the memory, it would make such a huge difference. And what I've heard from a lot of men especially is sometimes their friends think it's their role to distract the man from the grief. Like, we're here to entertain you, let's go do something together, let's talk about other things, but it's really that their friends are uncomfortable talking about it, but they want to be supportive and they have no idea, so they try to come up with different distractions. So I think that's why we get some of the men that we do to group, because they don't have a place with their friends to talk about it, and they don't know how to broach it with them in a way that doesn't make them uncomfortable. Sometimes being able to say, like, sometimes I'm just going to mention her name. It's really okay. Being able to say something like that. Yeah.
One of my 36-year-old son is, God bless him, he is the attorney general of my
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine what I would do without him, but for him, can't get any distance
Mm-hmm.
from his dad's death because he's so busy in business. But he also said his friends in his age group, he's 36, I can't say that. At first, everybody was like, how are you doing? And then all of a sudden, they're like done.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not dwell on your dad anymore. We're done with that. And
Yeah.
that's been so hard for him because he's still immersed.
Yeah.
And he will be. I don't think he's doing it all with his what I my other son did because he had a wife.
Mm.
So he's done grieving and he knows.
Yeah.
But my older son is not dealing with it at all. One of the reasons I came is I want to be for myself, of course, but I also want to be able to say the right thing
Mm-hmm.
because people quit listening. They do.
Yeah.
They think you seem like you're doing okay, then they think, well, we don't have to worry about them anymore, or they're all doing fine, they're going to be fine, but you're really not.
Yeah, and also people tend to think, I saw her for lunch, she was doing great, and then if you call crying, they're like, oh, I thought you were doing better, like they're disappointed. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Get up and get dressed and talk. I mean, there are days that I can do that, but at first I was inundated with invitations
Mm-hmm.
to go to lunch, which I don't do anyway. It's just not my thing. But they keep thinking they want to get you out and entertain you, like you said, and it's, and then somebody said, if you keep saying no, nobody's going to call you. And I'm like, well, I don't want to say no.
Yeah. Well, you can always call them in in the future if they quit calling. People need their space too. Some people, I've one of the questions we ask when people join, we do a phone interview just to see what their experience of grief has been and how they're doing. And one of the questions we ask is about what kind of support do you have, who's been there for you, what organizations or individuals have been there for you. And sometimes I hear people say, my family's been in town, people are coming by, I really want everyone out of the house. Just sometimes that sense of, and then there's other people who are like, I don't know what I'm going to do when they all go back home. And so it can vary a lot in terms of what people need. Did I see another question? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think being able to put what you need out there, saying, you know what, I would love to go to a movie with you, but I really don't want to talk about things tonight. Just want to let you know, so let's just go and be light. It doesn't have to be the elephant in the room. Just want to let you know I want this to be a fun night. Or being able to say, you know what, I'm really having a hard time, and I would love to go out to dinner with you, but I just want to let you know that I'll need to talk about some things, and if you're not okay with that, then I'll stay home. Being able to tell people can be helpful. And also choosing the right people to say those things. Think about the friend you're talking to. Is this someone who can adjust to this or not? And if your social circle of group of friends aren't the ones, are there other people you can turn to, whether it be a therapist or a support group, that you could join? And there's a lot of stuff online too. More and more people who are grieving are turning to online communities to be able to chat with someone at 2 a.m. That sort of thing.